They moved like whispers in the darkness, crossed impossible distances without leaving a trace, and changed the fate of empires with nothing more than patience, wisdom, and the art of perfect invisibility. Tonight, we slip behind the veil of history to discover the true masters of shadow, the ninja of medieval Japan. But prepare to forget everything you think you know. The real ninja were far stranger, far more brilliant, and infinitely more fascinating than any legend dared imagine. They were not superhuman assassins leaping from rooftops, but something far more remarkable, ordinary people who unlocked extraordinary secrets about human nature, the art of adaptation, and the power of moving through the world like wind through tall grass. In the gentle darkness behind your closed eyelids, prepare to step into a hidden realm where farmers became spies, where merchants toppled armies without drawing a sword, and where the greatest victories were won by warriors no one ever saw coming. Imagine Japan as it was over 1,000 years ago. A land of rolling hills covered in emerald forests, where morning mist clings to mountain peaks like silk scarves. Ancient temples with curved roofs pierce through clouds of incense, while rivers wind their way through valleys where farmers tend to rice paddies that gleam like mirrors under the setting sun. This is where our story begins. The ninja were not born from fantasy, but from necessity. They were the children of a turbulent age, shaped by the very real need to gather information, to move unseen, and to protect what they held most dear. As you settle deeper into comfort, let the weight of the day fall away from your shoulders. Feel your breathing slow and deepen. Tonight, you are not just hearing a story. You are stepping into history itself, walking alongside figures who changed the course of a nation while remaining forever in the shadows. The word ninja itself means one who endures, or one who is invisible. But perhaps most beautiful of all, it can also mean one who perseveres in the heart. And that, more than any weapon or technique, was their greatest strength. Let us drift back now, back through the centuries, to the year 794. The imperial capital of Japan has just moved to a new city called Heiankyo, which we know today as Kyoto. The emperor sits upon his chrysanthemum throne, believing himself to rule over a land of peace and harmony. But beyond the glittering walls of the imperial palace, Japan is anything but peaceful. Picture, if you will, the misty mountains of central Japan. In particular, the remote regions of Iga and Koga, where dense forests cling to steep mountainsides and hidden valleys shelter small communities from the outside world. The people here are different from the refined courtiers of the capital. They are mountain folk, tough and self-reliant, descended from families who fled to these hills during earlier conflicts. According to the ancient chronicle known as the Nihon Sandai Jitsuroku, written in 901, these mountain communities began to develop something unique during the 9th century. As the imperial government's control weakened and local warlords grew stronger, the villagers of Iga and Koga found themselves caught between competing powers. They couldn't rely on the distant emperor for protection, nor could they match the armies of the rising samurai clans in open battle. So they learned to be invisible. Imagine a young farmer named Takeshi. It's a cool autumn evening, and he's returning from checking the hidden paths through the mountains when he spots the glow of torches in the distance. Raiders from a rival province are approaching his village. In the old days, his people would have fled or fought and died. But Takeshi has learned new ways. He doesn't run to sound an alarm. Instead, he melts into the shadows beneath the pine trees, moving silently along paths known only to his people. He reaches the village well before the raiders, not by running faster, but by knowing the secret ways through the forest. By the time the torches arrive at his village, they find only empty houses. The entire community has vanished into hidden caves and forgotten trails, taking their grain stores and livestock with them. This was the beginning of ninjutsu, not as a martial art, but as a way of life. The Chinese historian Chen Shou, writing much earlier about similar tactics, called it the art of winning without fighting. The mountain people of Iga and Koga were rediscovering an ancient truth, that intelligence and invisibility could triumph where strength alone would fail. As you listen to these words, feel yourself sinking deeper into your bed, like those ancient villagers melting into the safety of their mountain hideaways. The ninja's first lesson was about finding sanctuary, about knowing when to be seen and when to disappear. There's something deeply peaceful in that wisdom, isn't there? The knowledge that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing how to become invisible to the chaos around us. The monastery records from Mount Hai, kept by Buddhist monks during this period, tell us something fascinating. They describe how the mountain people would sometimes approach the temples at night, appearing like spirits from the forest mist. They came not as enemies, but as students. They wanted to learn the monks' meditation techniques, their methods of moving in silence through the temple grounds during pre-dawn prayers. The monks called them Yamabushi, mountain ascetics, though history would remember them by another name. These early ninja were learning that physical stealth was only half the art. True invisibility required mental discipline, the ability to calm the mind until it became as still as a forest pool at midnight. Brother Ryujin, a monk who later became abbot of Mount Hai, wrote in his diary, "They come to us like deer at the edge of a clearing, alert, graceful, ready to vanish at the first sign of danger. Yet when they speak, their words show depths of wisdom that would surprise the court scholars." This partnership between the mountain people and the Buddhist monasteries created something revolutionary. The ninja were developing not just techniques of stealth and survival, but a philosophy. They understood that true strength came not from the sword, but from harmony with one's environment. Like water finding its way around stone, they learned to achieve their goals by adapting to circumstances rather than forcing their way through obstacles. As the Heian period deepened into its second century, these techniques spread quietly through the mountains. Families began to specialize in different aspects of invisible warfare. Some became masters of weather prediction, able to read the sky so perfectly they could vanish into storm clouds just as their enemies arrived. Others learned the secret languages of animals and birds, using owl calls and cricket songs to communicate across impossible distances. The Fujiwara court records from 967 mention an intriguing incident. A valuable scroll containing imperial poetry had been stolen from the palace. The court investigators were baffled. The treasury where it was kept had shown no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no evidence that anyone had even been there. Yet the scroll was gone. 3 days later, it reappeared exactly where it had been, but with a single addition, a small sketch of a mountain flower drawn in the margin. It was a message: we were here. We could have taken anything. We chose to take nothing of real value, only something that would be noticed. Remember that your walls cannot keep out the wind. Let that image settle in your mind as your breathing grows even slower and more rhythmic. The idea of moving through the world so lightly that you barely disturb it, yet with such skill that you can reach anywhere you choose to go. This is the dream of perfect invisibility, not to cause harm, but to move through life like a gentle breeze that touches everything and disturbs nothing. The foundation was being laid for something extraordinary. In the misty mountains of Japan, ordinary people were discovering extraordinary abilities. They were becoming the shadows of history, the unseen hands that would guide their nation's destiny. And their story was only just beginning. The year is 1185. The great Minamoto clan has just triumphed over their rivals, the Taira, in the naval battle of Dan no Ura. Japan is about to enter a new age, the age of the samurai. Minamoto no Yoritomo will soon establish his military government in Kamakura, beginning 7 centuries of warrior rule. But in the mountains of Iga and Koga, the ninja clans are watching these great events with calculating eyes. The establishment of the Kamakura shogunate changed everything for Japan's shadow warriors. No longer were they simply mountain villagers hiding from raiders. The new military government needed information. They needed to know what their enemies were planning, what the imperial court in Kyoto was discussing behind closed doors, whether the great Buddhist monasteries were plotting rebellion. Picture the scene: a light rain is falling on the ancient capital of Nara, where the great bronze Buddha sits in meditation within Todaiji Temple. The temple grounds seem deserted in the pre-dawn darkness, but appearances can be deceiving. High in the wooden rafters of the temple complex, a figure moves with impossible silence. This is Daisuke of the Iga clan, and he has been sent to discover whether the monks are hiding weapons for the emperor's supporters. Daisuke has been in the temple for 3 days, but no one has seen him. During the day, he becomes a traveling merchant, selling rice and vegetables in the temple market. The monks know him as a humble trader with a kind smile and a gift for remembering everyone's names. But at night, he transforms. The art of hensujutsu, disguise and infiltration, reached its peak during these early years of samurai rule. The Byukushohado, the legal code for warrior houses written in the 13th century, actually mentions the problem of false monks, merchants, and servants who gather intelligence for enemy purposes. They were talking about ninja, though they didn't use that word yet. Master Iga Hina-Zaemon, whose techniques were recorded in the secret scrolls called the Bansonshuki centuries later, pioneered what he called the 7 ways of walking. A ninja could change not just their clothes and appearance, but their entire bearing. They could walk like a merchant hurrying to market, shuffle like an elderly pilgrim, stride like a confident samurai, or glide like a temple servant accustomed to moving without disturbing prayers. But the most remarkable transformation was internal. According to the training scrolls preserved in the Iga-ryu Ninja Museum, a ninja had to be able to change their very presence. They called it Kokoro wa Karaku Suru, making the heart empty. When you encountered them in their role as a humble merchant, that's genuinely what they became in that moment. There was no pretense, no acting, just complete transformation. Imagine how liberating that must have been. To be able to become anyone, to fit perfectly into any situation. Like water taking the shape of whatever container holds it, the ninja learn to adapt their entire being to their circumstances. There's something beautifully peaceful in that complete flexibility, that total acceptance of change. The records of the Hojo regent family, who controlled Japan after Yoritomo's death, tell us about the Festival of Invisible Servants, though they probably didn't realize that's what they were documenting. Every year during the Obon festival, when spirits of the ancestors were said to return to Earth, strange things would happen in Kamakura. Messages would appear on the desks of government officials, warnings about corrupt subordinates, information about planned rebellions, details of foreign ships spotted off the coast. The messages were always accurate, always timely, and always unsigned. The officials began to joke that they had guardian spirits watching over them. In a way, they were right. One of the most beautiful stories from this period concerns a ninja named Momochi Tamba. The Taihiki military chronicles describe how he was sent to infiltrate a fortress held by enemies of the Hojo. But when he arrived, disguised as a wandering Buddhist monk, he discovered that the lord of the castle was not a rebel at all, but a gentle man who spent his wealth caring for orphan children. Momochi faced a dilemma. His orders were to gather intelligence for an attack on the castle. But his Buddhist training, for many ninja genuinely embraced the spiritual practices they used as cover, told him that some things were more important than following orders. So he became invisible in a different way. He submitted his report to the Hojo, but it was carefully crafted to make the castle seem too well defended and too unimportant to be worth attacking. At the same time, he secretly warned the castle lord that he was being watched, suggesting that a few strategic improvements to his defenses and a display of loyalty to Kamakura might be wise. Both sides believed they had won. The Hojo officials congratulated themselves on avoiding a costly siege. The castle lord strengthened his position and continued his charitable work. And somewhere in the mountains, Momochi Tamba smiled and moved on to his next assignment, carrying the knowledge that true victory sometimes meant ensuring that no one had to fight at all. This was the ninja's greatest art, not the throwing of shuriken or the scaling of walls, but the delicate manipulation of information and perception. They understood that reality is often less important than what people believe to be real. A rumor placed in the right ear at the right moment could change the course of history more effectively than any army. The Chinese strategist Sun Tzu had written about this centuries earlier. All warfare is based on deception. But the Japanese ninja took this concept further. For them, the highest form of warfare was the kind where no one realized warfare was happening at all. Conflicts were resolved, threats were neutralized, and peace was preserved through methods so subtle that even the people being helped never knew they had been helped. As you rest there, feeling your body grow heavier and more relaxed with each breath, consider the ninja's approach to problems. Instead of meeting obstacles head-on, they flowed around them like water around stones. Instead of fighting their enemies, they changed the battlefield so completely that their enemies forgot why they had wanted to fight. There's profound wisdom in this approach to life. Sometimes the best way to overcome a challenge is not to confront it directly, but to transform the entire situation until the challenge simply dissolves. Like shadows shifting with the movement of the sun, the ninja understood that everything in life is temporary, everything is changeable, and patience combined with wisdom can accomplish what force never could. The Kamakura period was teaching Japan's shadow warriors that true power lay not in strength of arm, but in flexibility of mind. They were becoming something new, not just spies or soldiers, but artists of human nature itself. And as the years passed, their canvas would only grow larger. The year is 1467, and Japan is tearing itself apart. The Unin War has begun, a conflict so devastating that it will rage for 11 years and leave the ancient capital of Kyoto in ashes. Great samurai armies clash in the streets where court poets once composed verses about cherry blossoms. The Ashikaga shogunate, already weak, fractures completely. Japan enters its most chaotic period, the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states. But in the mountains of Iga province, something extraordinary is happening. While the rest of Japan descends into chaos, the ninja clans are creating their most sophisticated networks, their most elegant strategies. This is their golden age, when the Shadow Warriors will prove that intelligence and subtlety can triumph over even the mightiest armies. Imagine the morning mist rising from the Kizu River as it winds through the Iga Mountains. In a hidden valley, barely visible from the main roads, stands a modest complex of buildings that looks like any other mountain village. Thatched roofs, vegetable gardens, perhaps a small shrine to the local kami. But look more carefully, and you might notice that the buildings are positioned with mathematical precision, that the gardens contain plants from regions hundreds of miles away, that the shrine's bells carry farther than they should through the mountain air. This is one of the secret training centers where the Iga-ryu and Koga-ryu schools are developing their arts to perfection. Here, children learn to read the wind and predict weather changes 3 days in advance. Young adults master the subtle art of kaijitsu, the strategic use of truth and falsehood to achieve larger goals. And the elders, the true masters, practice the highest form of ninjutsu, the art of making war unnecessary. The chronicles of this period, particularly the Mikawa Go Fudoki written by Honda Masanobu, tell us about a ninja master known only as Kagemaru, Shadow Circle. His real name is lost to history, but his techniques shaped an entire generation of shadow warriors. Kagemaru taught that the perfect ninja operation was one that achieved its objectives while leaving everyone involved convinced that nothing unusual had happened at all. Consider his most famous assignment. In 1485, two powerful daimyo families were preparing for a war that would have devastated 3 provinces. The Matsudaira clan believed that the Imagawa family was planning to attack their territory. The Imagawa were convinced that the Matsudaira were already moving troops to strike first. Both sides were right to be suspicious, and both were completely wrong about the timing and scale of the threat. Kagemaru was hired by concerned merchants in the region. Men who knew that war would destroy the trade routes that fed their families. His mission was not to stop the war through force, but to make it simply evaporate. First, he became a sake merchant, traveling between the territories of both clans. In the Matsudaira domain, he sold excellent rice wine and told stories about the Imagawa lord's recent illness, his concerns about his elderly mother, his daughter's upcoming wedding. Small details, all true, all gathered through careful observation and conversation. But the cumulative effect was to paint a picture of a leader too distracted by family matters to be planning an immediate war. In the Imagawa territory, he told different stories, true accounts of the Matsudaira lord's recent generosity to temples, his donation of rice to famine-stricken villages, his son's scholarship and gentle nature. Again, all factual, all carefully chosen to suggest a man of peace rather than war. But Kagemaru's masterstroke was more subtle. He arranged for both lords to receive the same intelligence. Reports that bandits were planning to attack supply convoys traveling between the territories during the autumn harvest. Both clans, responding to this mutual threat, sent patrols to guard the roads. When the patrols encountered each other, instead of seeing enemies preparing for war, they saw fellow soldiers protecting innocent merchants and farmers. The bandits, incidentally, were real, a group of Ashiguro foot soldiers who had deserted from a battle further south. Kagemaru had simply redirected their attention toward easier targets in a different province, while simultaneously ensuring that the lords who might have hired them were busy with other concerns. No lies were told. No false information was planted. Reality was simply, arranged, so that truth served peace instead of war. The two lords never fought their war. In fact, the following spring, their children married, uniting the clans in alliance. Both families believed this had been their idea all along. The merchants who had hired Kagemaru prospered, the harvest was brought in safely, and somewhere in the mountains, a master ninja smiled and moved on to prevent the next unnecessary conflict. This was the height of ninja artistry, what the secret scrolls call Tenchi Jin, harmony with heaven, earth, and humanity. The perfect ninja operation created positive outcomes for everyone involved, even the supposed enemies. It was warfare elevated to the level of art, strategy refined to the essence of wisdom. The training methods of this golden age reflect this philosophy. According to the Shininki scrolls written by Notori-ryu master Fujibayashi Yasutake in 1681, but describing techniques from much earlier, ninja students learned something called Kengoku no Jutsu, the art of the invisible prison. Picture a young ninja in training, blindfolded, standing in the center of a room. Around him, 12 master ninja move in complete silence. The student's task is not to locate them or defend against them, but simply to remain aware of the space, to sense the subtle changes in air movement, the tiny sounds of breathing, the almost imperceptible warmth of nearby bodies. But here's what made it extraordinary, the 12 masters weren't trying to hide from the student. They were trying to become so perfectly harmonized with the environment that they became part of it. When the student finally removed the blindfold, he often discovered that the masters had been standing in plain sight all along, but so naturally, so appropriately positioned, that his mind had simply accepted them as part of the room's natural arrangement. This training developed something beyond mere stealth. It cultivated a kind of presence that was simultaneously there and not there, visible yet invisible, active yet perfectly still. The masters called it Utsasimi, the empty cicada shell, present but containing no life, real but insubstantial. As you lie there in the peaceful darkness, feeling your consciousness drift like morning mist through mountain valleys, consider this paradox of the invisible presence. The ninja masters discovered that true invisibility comes not from hiding, but from becoming so perfectly aligned with your environment that you belong there completely. There's something deeply restful about this idea, isn't it? The notion that we can find perfect peace by learning to belong wherever we are, by becoming so naturally ourselves that we simply fit. The Golden Age ninja understood that the most powerful victories are the ones where nobody realizes they've been defeated, where problems solve themselves so naturally that everyone involved believes it was their own idea. They had learned to move through the world like beneficial spirits, improving situations while remaining unseen, creating harmony while taking no credit. In the secret valleys of Iga and Koga, the cherry trees bloomed and fell, marking the seasons of this golden age. Children grew into masters, masters aged into legends, and the art of the invisible warrior reached heights of sophistication that would never quite be equaled again. They had become something beyond soldiers or spies, they had become artists of possibility itself, painters on the canvas of human nature. But all golden ages must end, and on the horizon, a new kind of leader was rising. One who would challenge everything the ninja had built, and in doing so, force them to evolve once again. The year is 1560, and a sound like thunder rolls across the plains of Owari province. But this thunder comes not from storm clouds, but from the boots of a revolutionary army. Oda Nobunaga, a young daimyo whom the court nobles dismiss as the Fool of Owari, has just achieved the impossible. At the Battle of Okahazama, his tiny force of 3,000 men has defeated the mighty Imagawa army of 25,000. Japan will never be the same. For the ninja clans, this moment marks the beginning of their greatest challenge and their darkest hour. Nobunaga is unlike any leader they have ever encountered. He cares nothing for tradition, shows no respect for the old ways, and seems immune to the subtle manipulations that have served the shadow warriors so well for centuries. He is the rising sun that will burn away the comfortable darkness where ninja have thrived. Imagine the emergency council meeting in the hidden stronghold of Iga province. Elderly masters who have never shown emotion sit with furrowed brows. Messages have been arriving daily from their agents embedded in Nobunaga's rapidly expanding territory. The reports are troubling. This new leader doesn't rely on the complex web of alliances and traditions that ninja have learned to manipulate. He simply destroys anything that opposes him and rewards only absolute loyalty. Master Momochi Sandeu, one of the three great leaders of Iga province, speaks slowly as he unfolds a silk scroll containing the latest intelligence. This Nobunaga burns temples that have stood for centuries. He arms peasants with muskets and teaches them to fight in formations our mounted samurai cannot break. He promotes men based on ability rather than birth. He is either mad, or the future of Japan. The ninja's first encounters with Nobunaga's forces revealed just how different this enemy would be. In 1573, Nobunaga laid siege to the Ichiyama Hanganji fortress complex, which had resisted attacks for decades using traditional defensive strategies. The fortress monks had hired ninja to gather intelligence on the besieging forces and to infiltrate Nobunaga's supply lines. What the ninja discovered was unprecedented. Nobunaga's army wasn't just larger and better equipped than previous forces, it was organized according to entirely new principles. Soldiers received standardized training regardless of their social class. Supply lines were protected by multiple redundant systems. Intelligence operations were compartmentalized so that the capture of one spy revealed nothing about the others. Most disturbing of all, Nobunaga seemed to expect ninja infiltration attempts. His camps were designed with hidden observers watching the official sentries. False information was deliberately spread among different groups of soldiers, so that any leaked intelligence could be traced to its source. The traditional ninja arts of disguise and misdirection were being countered by systematic paranoia and ruthless efficiency. But it was Nobunaga's psychological approach that truly unnerved the shadow warriors. Previous leaders had been predictable, driven by honor, constrained by tradition, susceptible to appeals to their vanity or their fears. Nobunaga seemed to operate according to pure pragmatism. He would ally with today's enemy if it served tomorrow's goals. He would destroy today's ally if they became tomorrow's obstacle. The Shinchokoki, the official chronicle of Nobunaga's life, describes an incident that illuminates his character. A ninja named Sujitani Zenjibo had been hired by Nobunaga's enemies to assassinate the great unifier. Sujitani spent months preparing, studying Nobunaga's routines, identifying the perfect moment to strike. He positioned himself along a forest path where Nobunaga regularly rode, armed with one of the new Tanegashima muskets. When Nobunaga's procession appeared, Sujitani fired. The shot was perfect, except that the figure he shot was a decoy. Nobunaga had been varying his routes randomly, using multiple body doubles, and traveling at unpredictable times. Even more unsettling, when Sujitani was captured, Nobunaga didn't torture him for information about his employers, as previous leaders would have done. Instead, he offered Sujitani a position in his own intelligence service. This was Nobunaga's genius and his terror. He understood that loyalty could be purchased more reliably than it could be commanded, and that a former enemy often made the most motivated ally. He was turning the ninja's own principles against them, using their techniques of adaptation and pragmatism, but stripped of their moral constraints and traditional limitations. The crisis came to a head in 1579, when Nobunaga's forces finally turned their attention directly to Iga province. Unlike previous military campaigns, this wasn't about conquest or tribute. Nobunaga had decided that the ninja clans were an anachronism that had no place in his unified Japan. They would be eliminated entirely. The Iga no Ran, the Iga revolt, has gone down in history as one of the great military disasters of the ninja clans. But the true story, preserved in secret family chronicles and temple records, reveals something more complex and more tragic. The ninja didn't simply lose a battle, they faced a fundamental choice about who they wanted to become. Master Hattori Hanzo, perhaps the most famous ninja leader of this period, represented one path forward. Hanzo chose to ally himself with Tokugawa Ieyasu, Nobunaga's eventual successor. He transformed his ninja skills into intelligence services for the emerging unified state. His people would survive, but they would do so by becoming part of the system they had once operated outside of. But other masters chose differently. Momochi Sandeu and his followers decided that some traditions were worth dying for. They would resist Nobunaga's forces not because they believed they could win, but because they believed that certain ways of life should not be allowed to disappear without a fight. The final battle for Iga province took place on a morning when autumn mist clung to the mountain valleys like the ghosts of ancient spirits. Nobunaga's son, Oda Nobukatsu, led 10,000 professional soldiers equipped with the latest weapons into the heart of the ninja homeland. They faced fewer than 4,000 defenders, farmers, craftsmen, and monks who had learned the arts of invisibility. The battle was never really in doubt. The ninja fought with desperate courage, using every technique their ancestors had developed. They struck from hidden positions, melted away when pursued, reappeared behind enemy lines like vengeful spirits. But courage and cleverness could not overcome the mathematics of modern warfare. Yet even in defeat, the ninja achieved something remarkable. The casualty ratios were far from what Nobunaga's planners had expected. More importantly, hundreds of ninja families successfully evacuated during the fighting, disappearing into the broader population of Japan. They would preserve their knowledge and traditions, but in new forms adapted to new times. As you rest there in the gentle darkness, consider this moment of transformation. Sometimes in life, we face changes so profound that our old ways of being simply cannot continue. The ninja of Iga faced such a moment, the choice between adapting completely or preserving their essence by accepting defeat. Both choices required tremendous courage. Some became servants of the new order, using their skills to build the peaceful, unified Japan that would emerge under Tokugawa rule. Others chose to fade into legend, preserving their arts in hidden schools and secret traditions that would inspire future generations. Neither choice was wrong. Both were necessary. The age of Nobunaga marked the end of ninja as an independent force in Japanese history. But it also marked their transformation into something new, guardians of ancient wisdom, keepers of forgotten arts, living links to a Japan that was rapidly disappearing. Like cherry blossoms falling in spring snow, their defeat contained within it the seeds of their eternal influence on Japanese culture and spirit. The shadows were learning to dance with the rising sun. And in that dance, they would discover new ways to serve the land they loved. The year is 1603, and Japan has found peace at last. Tokugawa Ieyasu sits in his new capital of Edo, having finally unified the country that Nobunaga began to conquer and Toyotomi Hideyoshi continued to shape. The age of warring states is over. The Pax Tokugawa has begun, and it will last for over 250 years. But in this new world of peace and order, what place is there for the children of shadow? The ninja faced their strangest challenge yet, how to preserve their traditions in a land where their skills seemed no longer needed. There would be no more secret wars, no more desperate missions to save provinces from destruction. Instead, there would be 2.5 centuries of carefully maintained stability, rigidly controlled social order, and peaceful isolation from the outside world. Picture a small village in the former Iga province, now peacefully integrated into the Tokugawa domain. The rice fields stretch golden in the afternoon sun, just as they did centuries before, but now they're marked with neat boundary stones that have remained undisturbed for generations. In a modest house at the edge of the village, an elderly man named Fujibayashi Yasutake sits at a low writing table, carefully brushing characters onto handmade paper. Yasutake is one of the last great masters of the old ways, and he knows that the world his family served for centuries is ending. But rather than let the accumulated wisdom of those centuries die with him, he has chosen to become something new, a chronicler of shadows, a keeper of invisible traditions. The scroll he's writing will become the Shininki, one of the most important ninja manuals ever created, and our clearest window into how the shadow warriors thought about their art. The way of the ninja, Yasutake writes, is not about techniques of war, but about understanding the true nature of existence. We learn to become invisible not by hiding from the world, but by understanding our place within it so perfectly that we move in harmony with its rhythms. This was the great transformation of the Edo period ninja. Stripped of their military purpose, they discovered the deeper spiritual foundations of their arts. The techniques that had once been used to infiltrate enemy castles became methods of meditation. The skills of reading human nature, once employed to manipulate political outcomes, evolved into profound psychological insights that would influence Japanese philosophy for generations. In the mountains and hidden valleys throughout Japan, secret schools preserved these transformed traditions. The Ige-ryu and Koga-ryu continued, but now they focused as much on calligraphy and poetry as on stealth and combat. Students learned that the highest form of invisibility was to live so naturally, so authentically, that you became transparent to yourself. Master Notori Masazumi, writing in his private journals around 1650, described the new approach. In the old days, we learned to become other people in order to deceive our enemies. Now we learn to become our truest selves in order to serve the greater harmony. The enemy we must now defeat is not external, but internal, the illusions that prevent us from seeing reality clearly. The hidden schools of the Edo period developed practices that sound almost mystical to modern ears. Students would spend months learning to sit so still that birds would nest in their hair. They practiced breathing techniques that could slow their heartbeat until it was barely detectable. They studied the movement of shadows throughout the day until they could predict exactly where darkness would fall at any moment. But perhaps most remarkably, they developed what they called Kokoro no Jutsu, the art of the heart-mind. This was the practice of reading the deepest emotions and intentions of others not through espionage or manipulation, but through a kind of empathetic invisibility that allowed them to truly understand what drove people to act as they did. Consider the story of Yamada Koman, a descendant of the great IGA masters who became a humble village doctor during the mid-Edo period. Yamada had inherited all the traditional ninja skills. He could move without sound, appear and disappear like morning mist, read people's intentions from the slightest changes in their posture or breathing. But he used these abilities not for espionage or combat, but for healing. When he approached a sick patient, Yamada could assess their condition not just through medical examination, but through the subtle arts his ancestors had developed. He could tell from the way someone held their shoulders whether their illness came from physical causes or emotional distress. He could read in their eyes whether they would respond better to gentle encouragement or firm guidance. He could sense the family dynamics that might be contributing to their condition and address those with the same delicacy his forebears had used to manipulate political situations. The village records, preserved in the local temple, tell us that Yamada's patients often felt that he could see into their souls. He understands what hurts before we tell him, one patient wrote. It's as if he becomes invisible to our defenses, not to harm us, but to help us heal parts of ourselves we didn't even know were wounded. This was ninjutsu transformed into something beautiful. The same profound understanding of human nature that had once served warfare now dedicated to healing, to understanding, to helping people become more authentically themselves. The ninja were learning to be invisible to suffering rather than invisible to enemies. The Tokugawa government, meanwhile, had found official roles for some ninja families. The Hattori clan, led by the descendants of the famous Hattori Hanzo, became part of the shogun's intelligence service, the Oniwaban, or Garden Guards. But their work was now focused on preventing crime and maintaining social stability rather than conducting warfare. These official ninja developed new techniques suited to peacetime. They learned to move invisibly through the crowded streets of Edo, now grown into one of the world's largest cities. They mastered the art of listening to conversations in tea houses and markets, gathering information about public sentiment and potential unrest. They became experts at diffusing tense situations before they could escalate into violence. But perhaps the most profound development of the Edo period was the ninjas' embrace of what they called Mu no Kokoro, the heart of nothingness. This wasn't nihilism or emptiness in a negative sense. Rather, it was the cultivation of a mind so clear, so free of preconceptions and desires, that it could respond perfectly to whatever situation arose. The secret training scrolls from this period describe meditation practices that sound almost like poetry. Sit beside a flowing stream until you become the sound of water over stones. Stand beneath falling snow until you become the silence between flakes. Walk through a busy marketplace until you become the space between people. Students learned that true invisibility wasn't about hiding from perception, but about becoming so naturally present that you didn't disturb the natural flow of events around you. Like a fish moving through water or a bird flying through air, the perfect ninja moved through human society creating no ripples, leaving no trace, yet achieving exactly what needed to be achieved. As you lie there, feeling your breath flow in and out as naturally as wind through mountain pines, imagine what it would feel like to move through your daily life with that kind of effortless presence. No struggle, no force, no need to prove yourself or compete with others. Just the quiet confidence that comes from being exactly who you are, exactly where you belong. The Edo period ninja discovered that the deepest secrets weren't hidden in castle vaults or encrypted messages, but in the human heart. They learned that the most important intelligence wasn't about troop movements or political plots, but about the fundamental patterns of hope and fear, love and loss, that drive all human behavior. In their mountain retreats and hidden schools, the ninja of the peaceful centuries preserved something precious, not just techniques of stealth and combat, but a complete philosophy of how to live in harmony with the world. They understood that true strength comes not from the ability to force your will upon others, but from the wisdom to see what is truly needed and the skill to provide it without anyone realizing you were there. The cherry trees bloomed and faded, marking the passage of decades in the peaceful valleys where the ninja traditions lived on. Children learned ancient songs that contained encoded instructions for reading weather patterns. Young adults studied calligraphy that looked like art but was actually a cipher for recording intelligence. Masters taught meditation techniques that appeared to be spiritual practices but actually developed the heightened awareness necessary for perfect stealth. And always, they remembered the deepest teaching of their ancestors, that the greatest victory is the one where no one realizes there was ever a battle to be won. The year is 1868, and the sound of cannon fire echoes across Tokyo Bay. Commodore Perry's black ships have come and gone, the Meiji Restoration has begun, and Japan is opening to the world after 2.5 centuries of isolation. In the space of a few years, everything that defined traditional Japanese life will be swept away by the tide of modernization. The age of the samurai is ending. The age of the ninja is becoming something else entirely. As you rest there in peaceful darkness, imagine the last meeting of the traditional ninja masters. It takes place not in a hidden mountain fortress, but in a modest tea house in Tokyo, where the sound of steam trains can be heard in the distance. The elderly men who gather here are the inheritors of secrets that stretch back to the misty beginnings of Japanese history. But they know they are living through the end of an era. Master Kawakami Gensai, one of the last practitioners of the old arts, speaks slowly as he pours tea with hands that once threw shuriken with deadly accuracy. The world is changing faster than mountain snow in spring rain. Our techniques for moving unseen through castle towns are useless in cities lit by gas lamps. Our methods of gathering intelligence seem quaint in an age of telegraph wires and newspapers. What shall become of the way we have preserved for so many centuries? But Master Fujita Seiko, who would later become known as the last true ninja, has a different perspective. The techniques may become obsolete, he says, but the spirit behind them is eternal. People will always need to understand human nature. They will always need the wisdom to know when to act and when to wait. They will always need the strength that comes from moving in harmony with the world rather than fighting against it. And so began the ninja's final transformation, from historical reality into something even more powerful, eternal symbol, universal archetype, inspiration for the human spirit's endless capacity to adapt and overcome. The real ninja faded into legend, but in doing so, they achieved a kind of immortality that no earthly warrior could ever attain. In the decades that followed the Meiji Restoration, as Japan struggled to balance tradition with modernization, the memory of the ninja evolved into something beautiful and strange. Writers like Futaro Yamada began crafting novels that transformed the historical shadow warriors into supernatural beings capable of miraculous feats. Filmmakers like Akira Kurosawa explored the deeper themes of honor, duty, and adaptation that had always been at the heart of ninja philosophy. But perhaps most remarkably, the ninja tradition began to spread beyond Japan's borders, carrying with it not just techniques of stealth and combat, but the deeper wisdom about living in harmony with change, about finding strength in flexibility, about achieving victory through understanding rather than force. The modern world, it turned out, needed ninja more than the medieval world ever had. Not the comic book version with magical powers, but the real ninja spirit, the ability to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances, to gather and process information effectively, to solve problems through creativity rather than brute force, to remain calm and centered in the face of chaos. In corporate boardrooms and scientific laboratories, in hospitals and schools, in every corner of human endeavor where wisdom and adaptability matter more than raw power, the true spirit of the ninja lives on. Every time someone chooses understanding over confrontation, patience over force, humble service over self-aggrandizement, they are practicing the deepest teachings of the shadow warriors. The martial arts schools that claim to teach ninja techniques today are preserving something real, even if their methods would seem foreign to the historical masters. They're keeping alive the understanding that true strength comes from knowing yourself so well that you can become anyone, that real invisibility comes from being so genuinely present that you disturb nothing around you, that the greatest victory is always the one that creates the most harmony. In the quiet moments just before sleep, when the busy thoughts of the day finally begin to settle, we can all touch something of the ninja spirit. That moment when you stop trying to force solutions and allow answers to arise naturally. That instant when you become so absorbed in an activity that self-consciousness disappears entirely. That peaceful feeling of being exactly where you belong, doing exactly what needs to be done, without any need for recognition or reward. The cherry trees still bloom in the mountains of Iga province, just as they did when the first ninja learned to move like shadows through their branches. The streams still flow down from the peaks, carrying the same clear water that once reflected the faces of children learning to read the secrets written in wind and weather. The temples still stand, their bells ringing across valleys where ancient wisdom was passed from teacher to student in whispers softer than falling snow. And in those sacred places, if you know how to look, you can still see them sometimes, not as supernatural beings or comic book heroes, but as they truly were, ordinary people who discovered extraordinary ways to serve the greater good. Farmers who learned to move like wine through tall grass. Merchants who understood the hearts of their customers better than their customers understood themselves. Healers who could become invisible to suffering and pain. They remind us that we all have the potential to be ninja in the truest sense, not through exotic techniques or mysterious powers, but through the simple, profound practice of becoming so genuinely ourselves that we can serve others without ego, solve problems without creating new ones, and move through the world leaving it a little more peaceful than we found it. As you drift now toward sleep, carry with you the ninja's deepest teaching. That the way of the shadow is ultimately the way of light, that true invisibility comes from perfect presence, and that the greatest victory is always the one where everyone wins. The mist rises from the mountains. The ancient spirits smile. And somewhere in the space between sleeping and waking, the eternal dance of shadow and light continues, as it has for 1,000 years, as it will for 1,000 more.